a classic of the grand strategy genre. It represents the immense difficulty and complexity of the pre-modern world. It's exceptionally dangerous, difficult to navigate, and highly competitive. And that's why it's a masterpiece. Endless but intuitive core systems manage to fulfill the original dream of grand strategy greater than any other competitors. To explain what I mean, I have to dive into the history of grand strategy. If you're British like me, you would have grown up with mixed feelings about the British Empire and imperialism in general. On the one hand, we're made aware that the whole slavery, genocide, and violent conquest business wasn't a great look. But on the other hand, the outfits. Also, you can't go wrong with a good old day to the British Museum. So imagine my excitement when I found a game that allowed me to experience the joy of colonizing a new, already inhabited land without the complex feelings real-life violence and displacement bring. That game is Europa Universalis IV. EU4, as it's known by those who don't enjoy a mouthful, is a fascinating game and a classic of the grand strategy genre. It's a product of the controversial but well-reputed titans of the genre, Paradox Interactive, the studio responsible for the Hearts of Iron series, Crusader Kings series, and Victoria series, not to mention Stellaris, and the game that managed to make the Roman Empire look boring, Imperator Rome. Now, my personal favourite out of all of Paradox's games is Crusader Kings 3, and I made a video on the topic if you're interested. No time refunds though. But I would put EU4 at a close second. You see, in many ways such comparison is limited, as while the two games share a genre, that's pretty much all they have in common. You see, role-playing as a lord is at the heart of CK3, whereas EU4 is above all about nation building, and its strength stems from the way it represents the immense difficulty and complexity of the pre-modern world from which nationalism arose. It makes this focus on nation building clear from the moment you load up the game. After you've chosen whether or not to risk it all with Iron Man or take the coward's way out, you are exposed to a gargantuan map dotted by disparate states, not individuals. This makes it perfectly clear to you that this game will not be about your character, but your nation, which in the time period of EU4 actually meant colonial empire. But what makes EU4 special, and not just a race against time to build a bigger imperial blob, is that it accurately represents the early stages of imperial exploitation and carries with it the dangers that were associated with the Enterprise before, the Gatling gun made it a bit easier. You see, the world of EU4 is exceptionally dangerous, difficult to navigate, and highly competitive, and that's why it's a masterpiece. Whatever nation you pick brings with them unique challenges and limitations that you are forced to overcome through carefully planned strategy. This is because of its strong core mechanical basis. To explain what I mean, I have to dive into the history of grand strategy. Grand strategy emerged in 1983 with an ambitious aim: to simulate the complex and dynamic world of geopolitics. With such an absurdly difficult goal ran the difficulty of how to actually represent things in the real world that can't be easily quantified. We don't even understand geopolitics ourselves. Listen to one realist scholar, or a liberal scholar, or a Marxist scholar, you will come up with 10 different interpretations of how the world works. And so innovators as a genre, Paradox among them, tried to tackle this issue, and successfully so in my opinion, by turning complicated phenomena like the current state and speed of technological advancement, diplomatic clout, and domestic political power into in-game currencies. Not purchasable ones, don't freak out. And I believe, in my humble opinion, that EU4 represents the epitome of this successful project to quantify real life. Other games like CK3 may be the masters of grand strategy role-playing, but EU4's endless but intuitive core systems manage to fulfill the original dream of grand strategy to replicate geopolitics greater than any of the other competitors. Now, to explain how every in-game currency interacts to form this experience would lead to a video so convoluted that watching Tenant afterwards would feel like a soothing break from the information overload. EU4 has a manpower system, a production system, a commerce system, a resource system, a technological era system, an administrative, diplomatic and military point system, a mercenary system, a territorial integrating system, a unit capacity system, and I've only covered a fraction of its vast systems there. This is why I would recommend any enthusiasts check out the various online guides before playing EU4. So I'm going to keep it simple. Leave the explanation of its mechanics to online guides and show you instead how EU works to provide a consistently challenging and enthralling experience by sharing my personal stories of playing the English and Japanese early game. As an Englishman, when I decided to boot up EU4 for the first time, I knew what nation I had to pick and which nation I had to pick off. Sorry, France. But I was shocked to discover that despite what the historical record of British imperial conquest suggests, embarrassing the French and then conquering the entire world wouldn't be a walk in the park. Yes, being Britain held many advantages, even at this pre-colonial era. As a European civilization compared to the civilizations of Asia, Africa and the Americans, I was considerably closer to the centers of pre-modern technological innovation. On top of this, I was in a prime position to set up a large naval force and could use this power to extract from the prosperous English Channel. But the shrouding of the world map in a grey fog and the limitations of the distance at which I could explore and turn distant land into core territories initially meant these advantages didn't mean much. You see, in Europe, not only could I not leverage my technological superiority because I was surrounded by powers who were more advanced or as advanced as I was, but I was in constant danger. Not only were the French knocking at the door ready to avenge losses in the 100 Years' War, but the vast interconnected networks of alliances across the continent made it exceptionally difficult to conquer a patch of land without sparking a European-wide conflict. At the same time, whenever I moved closer towards my English destiny by bathing in the blood of my conquered enemies and then integrating those territories into my state, nearby powers would grow fearful, and vast coalitions will form directly against my expansion. And this is all without mentioning the Ottomans or the shit show that is the Holy Roman Empire. This made it very difficult for me to conquer enough territory in Europe to gather the manpower and finances that one needed to pay for and replenish large armies. EU4 made me feel the acute vulnerability of England during this period so much that I could almost understand why many would see colonization and controlling the sea as their only hope for a prosperous frontier. My early English might have been dominated by the suffocating limitations of the endless European competition between small states, but this does not mean that playing the Japanese story was any easier. At least England was a realized political unit, whereas Japan, at the beginning of EU4, remained an idea, and the reality of the island was a collection of smaller states led by warlords known as daimyo. Therefore, my first goal was just to form this famed civilization. Now, when I booted up the game, this was a lot easier said than done. As being a lone daimyo in a sea of feuding equals, I had to carefully draw from limited manpower, limited economic resources, and construct the right diplomatic alliances to even remain above the board in this sea of sharks. Not to mention conquering the whole island. Eventually, however, I did triumph, but victory was only the beginning of the end. Even after I became its emperor, I was only a small piece on the vast Asian chessboard. A majestic stage dominated by a far greater empire with unimaginable resources who gripped Asia with the heft of their tremendous tentacles, and trust me, the Japanese know their tentacles. Of course, I'm talking about Asia's Leviathan, China. Despite their size, however, the Chinese were not known for their diplomacy, and so the threat of invasion loomed. However, being Japan at this point was not all doom and gloom. Being a small nation yielded one main advantage: more advanced technological growth. In EU4, you can boost technological growth in territories using your military, administrative, and diplomatic points. The problem with large states, however, is they don't get a boost to the accumulation in these points and have far more territory to meet the minimum amount of territory necessary to adopt a new era of tech. And I could take advantage of this small state bonus to secretly build an advanced army in preparation for a heroic defense or maybe even a surprise attack. Who knows what the future holds for Japan? Now, I've only really described the early game, but the tension really ramps up in mid-game as colonization emerges, the map opens up and armies become increasingly large across the globe. But in my humble opinion, the greatness of EU4 stems from the way it managed to maintain a solid flow from beginning to end. You see, unlike CK3 where you finish the game as the undisputed master of your personal continent-spanning fiefdom, EU4 never lets the player have a cozy imperial retirement. The population, economic, and expansion limitations that impeded your early game take on a new intercontinental form. Of course, the endgame, as with the other stages, has its flaws. For one, economic management, especially for England, becomes entirely useless once coal comes into play and the Industrial Revolutionary powers fills your coffers with virtually endless money. But the manpower mechanic and much improved mercenary system place much needed limitations on your ability to turn this economic dominance into military prowess. And thus, till the end, you will still have to adopt a strategic mindset to manage your intercontinental conquests. If you've enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and if you've hated it, remember one thing: no refunds in your time.